Okay, we're ready to begin. The mic is on, you can hear? Yeah, the mic is on, fine. Everybody can hear, you can hear? Maybe you can make the mic a little louder. Who's doing the mic here, you know? You can hear in the back over there? No, you cannot. We can make the mic a bissel hecher. Okay. Who's doing the mic? Anybody knows? Is it there? Okay. Yeah. Okay, it's better? Okay. All's good.
They're hooking up the camera, the video over there, and the next dance away.
Okay. Fine. Okay, I'm sorry for the delay here. There was some technical difficulties, but I think they're repaired. There's also a video in the next tent of this shiur. So if anybody wants to sit like a king or a queen, you could sit in the next tent. You could see it live, yeah. In the next tent, you could see it live. Here, I don't know if you'll see it live. Okay. If I can also ask of you to please put your cell phones on vibrate or off or airplane mode, we would appreciate it. If you could do it now in the beginning, thank you. Okay, my voice is a little shot today, but I hope you'll be able to hear me. So we're now going to have the first shiur for approximately an hour and a half. And then at 6 o'clock, we'll have Be'ezer Hashem, the second shiur, also for an hour and a half. There'll be mincha in between, videos in between, and then mincha also after the second shiur at 7:45. There is a pasuk, a verse in Tehillim that we say every single morning, 7 days a week. Tehillim Kuf Mem Zayin, chapter 147. Boine Yerushalayim Hashem, Nidche Yisrael Yechanas. Hashem builds Yerushalayim, and those of the Jewish people who are scattered around the world, who are Nidche, Nidochim, rejected, lost, forlorn, he will gather. There's a medrash on this pasuk. It's known as a medrash pliya. Medrash pliya means those medrashim that are strange, very difficult to understand. The medrash says, I quote, Afal pi shebayni Yerushalayim Hashem, mikol makoim nidche Yisrael yechanas. Even though Hashem rebuilds Yerushalayim, nonetheless, he will still gather there all of the all the Jewish people who are scattered around the world. At first glance, it's a very strange medrash. The medrash sees this pasuk as a afal pi, as a chiddush, as a novel. Even though Hashem builds Yerushalayim, you might think he won't gather the Jewish people there. Comes the pasuk and says, no, afal pi that bayni Yerushalayim Hashem, nonetheless, nidche Yisrael yechanas. What's the question? What was the initial thought? And what's the chiddush? What's the concluding thought? Another question in this pasuk is the grammar. Begins with present and it concludes with future. He builds Yerushalayim. He will and gather the scattered ones of the Jewish people. Either it could have said, Boini Yerushalayim Hashem, Nidche Yisrael Mechanes, or Yivne Yerushalayim Hashem, Nidche Yisrael Yechanes. That would make the beginning of the verse and the end of the verse, it would synchronize them. But here the beginning opens up with present, Lashon Haiva, Boine, and the conclusion with the future, Yechanes. Those are the two issues we want to begin with. Al's Beseder. There is a Mishnah, the last Mishnah of Maseches Gittin, page 90, Gittin Daf Tzaddik Amud Aleph, which at first glance is very difficult to understand. I'm going to quote it. The Mishnah wonders, what are the grounds for divorce? What are the legal grounds for a divorce? Beishamai Oimrim, Beishamai says, Lo yegarish adam es ishtoi, elim kein motza bo ervas dover. One should not get divorced unless there is promiscuity in the relationship. Beis Hillel Oimrim, Beis Hillel says, Afilu hikdicha tafshiloi. Even if she burnt his dish, comes home Shabbos, the cholent is overdone, the rice is too sticky. Beis Hillel says the food is burnt, that's it, the get. Rabbi Akiva says, Afilu motza acheres noah himena. Even if he finds a woman who's more beautiful than his wife, it's grounds for divorce. That's the Mishnah in Gittin, the last Mishnah. I was once giving a lecture on relationships. So there was somebody in the crowd who was somewhat educated in this field. And he says, why don't you present to the crowd the true Jewish version on romance? I said, what do you mean? Then tell them the Mishnah in Gittin. What are the Jewish grounds for divorce? The truth is, the Mishnah has to be understood. The school of Shammai, Beis Shammai, we understand. If there's promiscuity, if there's betrayal, if there's disloyalty in a relationship, Pasuk says, "V'hayim le'simtzechem be'einav ki matza bar ervas davar." That's Beis Shammai's proof. I can understand. It's time to end the marriage. Beis Hillel is very strange. She burns his food. That's what he really believed. Especially Beis Hillel is associated with a side of leniency. In Zohar it says that the neshamas, the souls of Beis Hillel, came from Chesed. Usually in Mishnayos, Beis Hillel is lenient, Beis Shammai is stringent. And here Beis Hillel says, wife burns the food, that's it. No. Rabbi Akiva is the most strange of all. Doesn't sound like coming from a Jewish sage, never mind Rabbi Akiva. It's more like a Hollywood condition for divorce. He's walking in the street. He sees somebody who is Noah Himeno, is more beautiful than his wife. That's it, kaput. The marriage is over. Very difficult to understand. Rabbi Akiva meant that. From all people, it's especially strange coming from Rabbi Akiva. Why? Rabbi Akiva knew what his wife did for him. Rabbi Akiva's wife sacrificed her life for him. Rabbi Akiva, what the Gemara says in Ksuvas, Rabbi Akiva was a shepherd. He was a son of converts. He was a simple shepherd. He was working for the sheep, for the Kalba Savua. He was one of the wealthy, prominent Jews of his generation. And Kalba Savua's daughter, Rachel, took a liking to Rabbi Akiva. And even though her father excommunicated her and banned her and completely made a vow that she would not benefit from a single dollar, a single cent of his assets, nonetheless, she, despite her father and her family, went with Rabbi Akiva. She married him. Not only that, Rabbi Akiva knew that his wife gave up 24 years of the marriage just for him. 24 years. First 12 years, she sent him to learn. And then when he came back, he heard her say she wouldn't mind if he learns another 12 years. And many men would dream of such a wife. Sends him away for 24 years, doesn't even have to come home once. But I guess they're not Rabbi Akiva and their wives are not Rachels. Works both ways. But that was Rabbi Akiva's wife. When he comes back with 2,000 students, he tells them, Shali v'shalachem, shalahu. What is mine, what is yours, all belongs to her. The Gemara asks him, Masechta Shabbos, Ezo Asher, who's wealthy? What's wealth? Gives different nations. Tarfon says, if you have 100 fields, and in each field you have 100 servants, basically you have a lot of real estate. Rabbi Yossi says, what is wealth? You have a table and you have a bathroom. You're a wealthy man. Don't complain. What does Rabbi Akiva say? What's wealth? Somebody has a good wife, is a reiche mensch, is a wealthy person. If you have a good wife, you're wealthy. So Rabbi Akiva, he knew it from personal experience. Comes Rabbi Akiva in the Mishnah and says, somebody sees another woman who looks more beautiful than his wife, that's grounds for divorce. Its truth is that the halacha is like Beis Shammai. Brought in Shulchan Aruch and Even Hazar, the Chalkas Mechoikek. The halacha is like Beis Shammai. A woman burns rice or steak or kishka, you don't go for a get. And certainly not the other issues. If there's promiscuity, there's grounds for divorce. And even then, we try to avoid it at all costs. It's only the last resort, as known. But I'm not asking now the halacha. I'm asking Pshat in the Mishnah. What was Beis Hillel thinking? What was Rabbi Akiva thinking? How do you understand this? How do you explain this perspective? What did they mean? Is this really what they believed? I want to bring up another issue, change the subject, we'll come back. The first revelation of Hashem to the first Jewish leader, Moshe, came about in a very extraordinary way. Hashem revealed himself to many people throughout history. The whole Bereshis is full of people who receive divine communication. Of Adam and Chava and the snake, and Cain and Noach and Avraham and Yitzchak and Yaakov and Rivka and even Avimelech and Parai. All of them received divine communication. How did Hashem reveal himself to them? I don't know. It says, Vayere love Hashem be'loine mamre. Hashem revealed himself to Avram. He appeared to Avram. Vayomer Hashem al Avram. Hashem says to Avram. What does it look like? I don't know. But apparently all of them experienced divine revelation. Suddenly you come to Shmois, comes Moshe Rabbeinu. Hashem reveals himself to Moshe Rabbeinu also. You would expect it would be the same. Vayera Hashem al Moshe. Vayomer Hashem al Moshe. God would reveal himself to Moshe. It's not what happens. There's a whole dramatic scene, literally of fireworks, a burning bush. Bush is being burnt. It's not being consumed. Moshe comes and says, I want to understand why it's not being consumed. And that's when God says, it's me. I'm the God of your father. I'm choosing you to liberate the Jewish people from the Egyptian exile. Why couldn't he just reveal himself to him like he revealed himself to prophets before and prophets afterwards? Without this whole beautiful, fantastic scene, all these fireworks, all these extraordinary appearances with the snare, the thorn bush is not being consumed. Why was it so necessary? A number of years ago, in the year 2000, I think it was, the United Nations sponsored a conference on racism. It took place in a city of Durban, in South Africa. Anybody has been to Durban here? No? I was in Durban. Durban and Umhlanga. They had their conference. I remember I was in the hotel there. They told me I shouldn't keep the window open because monkeys will come in and eat my bananas. Kachav. So they had their conference on racism in the year 2000. The United Nations decided then, made a resolution, a verdict, that from all the countries, I think the United Nations has 192 members. 192, I believe. And they made a decision that from the 192 countries that are members of the United Nations, there's one country in which racism is still practiced. It's still a racist country. It was not Syria. It was not Iran. It was not Afghanistan. It was not Pakistan. It was not Libya. It was not Saudi Arabia. It was not Egypt. Of course, it was Israel. America protested. America left. The American representative left the conference. But this was one of many infamous resolutions of the UN in Durban about one country that still practices racism. Quite fascinating. Shortly after, I was invited to Durban to lecture. And I spoke at the JCC in Durban, the Jewish Community Center. Around 200 or 300 Jews turned out, which is probably most of the community, if not the entire community. It was very impressive. And I spoke about racism, I spoke about Israel, I spoke about the Jewish people. In the middle of my lecture, I used a term that is not PC. It's very not politically correct. The term I used that's really not politically correct was the term CP, which is chosen people. CP is really not PC. I called the Jews the chosen people. And somebody was extremely annoyed, very, very upset. He maintained and he said that to call the Jews people is itself racism. And it's what instigates and triggers anti-Semitism the world over. Because when people hear that Jews believe they're the chosen people, it makes them angry or envious or resentful towards Jews, and it just fans the flames of Jew hatred, if not creates the flames of Jew hatred. And for a sensitive, sophisticated, enlightened person in the 21st century, the beginning of the 21st century, to say such a term, chosen people, on the Jews, is unheard of. It's ludicrous. It's ridiculous. It smacks with bigotry and phobia and narrow-mindedness and a very restricted worldview. This was the comment, the feedback I received. No, how do you respond to this? So I asked the fellow if he was married. He said, yeah, he was married. What's the connection? He wanted to know if he's married to chosen people being racist. So I want to ask a question. Are you an intelligent person? So is he going to say not? Yeah, he's an intelligent person. Handsome you are? Is he going to say not? Every Jewish guy thinks he's God's gift to humanity. He's handsome also. I said, and we learned from your question also that you're sensitive. You're sensitive to human rights. You're sensitive to bigotry. You're sensitive to phobias that discriminate against people. That means you have all the milas in the world, basically. You have all the virtues in the world. You're handsome, you're good looking, you're wise, and you're morally and emotionally sensitive. What else can a man ask for? And therefore, I'm surprised that a guy like you got married. He said, what do you mean? Why shouldn't I get married? I said, a person like you, with all of your virtues, should have stood up to the world. How many women are there in the world? I said, 4 billion women. A person like you should have stood up and said, listen, either I marry all women or I marry nobody. But such discrimination that you have, you chose one woman, you rejected all billions of women you rejected. What is my wife supposed to feel? She had to end up with a guy like me and so many other women like that. A man like you with so much talent and so much virtue had to get up and say, either I marry every woman, which is fine, or I marry nobody. Instead, you really discriminate against so many women. All the women in the world you say are not good, they're not worthy for you. One woman you chose. I really don't understand how a person who could be upset at me for saying chosen people did exactly the same thing when it came to marriage. You chose a wife and you rejected every other woman in the world. And imagine just how they feel because of it. He said, Rabbi, are you mad? I said, why? I'm saying, I'm being rational, no? You're so sensitive to these things. You're a male chauvinist. You have issues with chosen people. You did exactly the same thing when it comes to men and women. So he said, just because I married one wife, it doesn't mean I discriminate against other women. I said, so why didn't you marry all of them? I'm sure they would have all jumped for a guy like you. Why didn't you marry all? You should have married nobody. He says, what are you talking about? You marry one woman, I married one woman. I said, so what does that mean about other women? What are they supposed to feel? He said, just because I married one woman, it doesn't mean I look down at women. I hold in high regard every woman. I respect every woman. There's just one woman that I married. That's it. But just because I married her, it doesn't mean other women are not women. I'm just not married to them. I said, very well. Listen to your words, and now you'll understand exactly what the concept of chosen people means. The concept of chosen people does not mean that other peoples or humans are to be looked down at or disregarded or discriminated against or disrespected. In parentheses, I'm going to add, it's not really the topic today, but I'm going to add it just in parentheses. We, the Jewish people, because we suffered so much in exile, especially in Europe, before the war, so Jews developed a certain vocabulary when it came to Gentiles. And I think many of us still suffer from it. And really, we need to heal from it. Because today is an opportunity in the world where Jews can have a tremendous positive influence on the non-Jewish world in terms of morality, in terms of Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, in terms of justice, in terms of charity, in terms of kindness, philanthropy, family values, moral values, ethical values. And many, many Gentiles are very good people. But a lot of Jews, especially in the ultra-Orthodox community, are still used to the language that dominated the Jewish shtetl for so many years, and parents or grandparents who were Holocaust survivors. So naturally, as a result of that, there's a certain type of vocabulary that is spoken about when it comes to Goyim. Now, in some situations, it's more than true. In many situations, it's not true. And Jews but are not fulfilling their mandate that was given to them in today's generation by God, which is to influence the whole world. All Jews and also all of mankind. And for that, you need to come from a place of confidence and empowerment and goodwill, not just mistrust. So you have to know when and where and who you're dealing with, But that's just a general comment. So I say, it was the Bible, Genesis, that says, God created man, every human being in his image. He carved out every human being in the divine image. It doesn't say that about Jews. It says that about all descendants of Adam and Eve, every person. So how can you suspect Judaism in discriminating against people when the Jewish Bible, the Torah, was the first document to say that every human life is sacred? Shoifech dam ha'adam, b'dama yishafech. The blood of a human being, of every life, is sacred. Every human being was carved in the divine image. The concept of chosen people is just like you married your wife. The Jewish people, so to speak, are married to God. There's a special relationship. It doesn't mean other women are not respected, other men are not respected. Everyone has the unique value. Of course, she's not my wife doesn't mean she's not a woman. It's just not my wife. The Jewish people and God have a special relationship like a husband and a wife. What's the relationship of a husband and a wife? Complete oneness. Oneness means that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, they're completely one. It doesn't have to do if they're physically together or not physically together. He could be on a business trip 30,000 feet away. But nonetheless, they're still married. There is an essential v'nafsha kshura b'nafsha. The souls are connected. In Zohar, it says plag gufa. It's two halves of one soul. It's like two halves of one soul. They may be in two parts of the world, but it's still two halves of one soul. There's an essential connection between a husband and a wife. Sometimes they agree, sometimes they disagree. Sometimes they like each other, sometimes they don't like each other. I once heard from Eli Wiesel, Olav Shalom. He says, some Jews love God, some Jews hate God, but Jews don't know how to ignore God. It's like in a marriage. Either you like your husband or you hate your husband. It's very hard to ignore him. I mean, you could try, but it doesn't work. Even more with your wife. You could try ignoring your wife. It doesn't work. At some point, it emerges. Why? Because there's a relationship. The relationship has to be worked out, but there's a very powerful relationship. And this relationship is essential. And here I come to another mistake that many of us make. We often define, even in our chinuch system, what is Judaism? Judaism is a religion. Yiddishkeit is a religion. That's not true. Judaism is not a religion. It's not true. It has some components that make it similar to a religion, but it's not a religion. Proof for it is simple. Say a Christian, lahavdil, stops believing in the Lord and in Yashka and in everything Christians believe in. He stopped. His father believed in it, and he says, I'm an atheist. I have nothing to do with any of this. He's not a Christian anymore. His father was a Christian, Zayda was a Christian, his mother is a Catholic, his grandmother was a Catholic. For 2,000 years, they're Catholics. Fine, but I'm not. I'm a free-thinking, open-minded American, Columbia graduate atheist. My father's a Christian, I'm not. A Muslim. His father was a Muslim, his Zayda was a Muslim, his elder Zayda was Muhammad. He decides he doesn't believe anything Islam teaches, nothing. Takes the Quran, throws it in the dustbin. He's not a Muslim anymore. Why? He doesn't associate with this religion. Not in the blood, it's a belief. Now take a Jew. The Gemara in Sanhedrin, Afal Pisha Chata, Yisrael, Afal Pisha Chata, Yisrael. The Rashba says, in Shas Tshuvas Chelik Aleph, I think Simon Sadik Dalet, a Yisrael Mumar, a Jew converts. Doesn't only not believe, doesn't only not practice, he converts. Right? And he's Mekadesh Anisha. She needs a get, she needs a divorce. A Jew marries, a non-Jew marries a Jew, they don't need a get. It's not Kiddushin. It's not a definition of marriage. He needs to give her a get. Why? Yisrael Afal Pisha Chata, Yisrael. The halacha, he says, is like the mayor, ben kach or ben kach. Atem kruyim banim. There's always a relationship. And the relationship is essential. It's not something that can be nullified. You'll go over, I'll give you a simple experiment if you want to do this, okay? You don't have to do it, but the concept is what I want to convey. It's Sunday afternoon. Christians come out of church. If a Jew is standing there, ask any Christian who comes out, by the way, you believe in the Lord? He says, of course I believe in the Lord. Really? Of course. Why have I been screaming hallelujah now for 3.5 hours if I don't believe in the Lord? Friday, stand near a mosque, a Muslim comes out, say, you believe in Muhammad? Of course I believe in Muhammad. Why have I been fasting now Ramadan for a whole month if I don't believe in Muhammad? Why have I been kneeling 5 times a day and not eating all the good foods I want to eat? The halal diet? Of course I believe in Muhammad. Now come to a Hindu who's coming out of a Hindu ashram and say, you believe in karma? Of course I believe in karma. Why do I have this relationship with this worm for the last 49 years in my garden? Of course I believe in karma. Now ask the Buddhist coming out of a Buddhist monastery, you believe in Buddhism? Of course I believe in Buddha. Why have I been fasting for 52 years straight, involved in transcendental meditation, nirvana, one and all in one, melting away in nothingness and Maya if I don't believe in Buddha? Of course I believe in Buddha. What's the question? Now go to 5th Avenue, Temple Emmanuel, Yom Kippur. You could try this out. A Jew comes out 2 o'clock from Temple Emmanuel. The rabbi finished his sermon. He goes out, takes off his yarmulke, waves a taxi, gets, wait, sir, are you Jewish? How do you know? You believe in God? Me? You're crazy. I don't believe in God. You don't believe in God? Of course not. They used to think you need a God when there was no science. Today we have science enough to believe in God. It's interesting. So why were you Yom Kippur in shul? He says, well, it's Yom Kippur. So he says, so that means you believe in Yom Kippur and God? And well, no, I don't believe in anything. So why did you go to temple on Yom Kippur? He says, what do you mean? I'm Jewish. Yom Kippur, a Jew goes to temple. And he doesn't see it as a contradiction. Why? Judaism is not a religion. Judaism is the color of your soul. Just like I can't change the color of my eye, I also can't change the color of my soul. It doesn't have to do with my belief or my practice. Some believe, some don't. Some practice, some don't. But the color of their soul is a Jewish color. That's why in some of our cultures, we call a secular Jew a goy. You ever heard that? I learned that in Muncie. Somebody who doesn't, even a guy who doesn't mamish dress like you is also called a goy. That's like even a bigger chiddush. So what's the idea? The idea is if you call this Jew a goy, it's not pshat, it's not nice. That's mela. You don't have to do it in front of him. It means you don't even understand what it means that you're Jewish. By calling him a goy, it means that you think what makes you Jewish is the garments you wear, or even more, the practices that you do, or even more, the convictions that you have. That means you really don't understand what Judaism is for yourself. Yiddishkeit, Judaism, is not a religion. It's the color of a Jewish soul. There's an essential relationship with the divine. Some people have the privilege to live that relationship, and for some that relationship may be eclipsed, but the relationship is intact. I once got an interesting email from Sydney, Australia. This fellow writes an email as follows. He's Jewish, but he hates Jews. Okay. Not the first, not the last. When he was growing up, he said he told his mother he doesn't want to date Jews. Doesn't even want to marry a Jew. Not even a consideration. He married a non-Jewish woman. He said he's so not interested in the Jewish people. He bought himself a plot in a non-Jewish cemetery. So he shouldn't be buried in the Jewish cemetery. And they don't even practice or celebrate Hanukkah in his house. Not even Yom Kippur. Only Christian holidays. He's completely not Jewish, and he's living with a non-Jewish woman, and he didn't even tell his children that their father is Jewish. What's his question? This email is really getting inspiring. What's his question? His question is, he wants to know if Judaism has a ritual through which you can un-Jewishise yourself. Why? Because he still feels Jewish. And he says, just like by the Christians, there's something called baptizing. Is there something in Judaism through which I could become unbaptized, un-Jewishized? That's what he wants to know. And he says, thank you for addressing what's probably an unusual question for a rabbi to receive. What's the answer to this Jew? So the email sent back, the answer is good news and bad news. The good news is that you are as Jewish as the Chafetz Chaim, as the Vilna Gaon, as the Chassam Sofer, as Rabbi Akiva, as King David, and as Moses. You're not as knowledgeable as they. You're also not as observant as they, but you're as Jewish as they. That's the good news. The bad news is there's nothing you can do about it. There's really no tradition in Judaism to un-Jewishise yourself. My advice is, since it's who you are, why don't you try to make peace with who you are instead of running away from it for the rest of your life? The most interesting thing of the email, however, is that you think you're normal. Think about your email. You say you don't like Jews, you don't believe in Judaism, you married a non-Jew, you even bought a non-Jewish plot in the cemetery, you don't even observe one Jewish holiday. That means for you, Judaism means nothing. Yet you're looking for a Jewish ritual to make you feel not Jewish. But if all of Judaism is insignificant and inconsequential and meaningless, what would such a ritual help, even if there was such a ritual? If it's not authentic, if it's all fake and baloney, what's the point? Nonetheless, you feel so Jewish. You're ready to go to a rabbi, from all people, a rabbi to help you find in Judaism a way through which you should become not Jewish. And you think you're a normal person. But this crystallizes essentially what a Jew is. In a paradoxical, ironical, and maybe tragic way, it tells you what a Jew is. Judaism is not a religion. Judaism is the color of your soul, the state of your soul. So you have religious Jews, you have not religious Jews. They are as Jewish as any other Jew. They may be completely ignorant. They may be completely clueless, but they're as Jewish. This is a mistake that a lot of Haredi Jews make today. They forgot what it means to be Jewish. So when they see a Jew who's secular, they look at this Jew and they say, he's a goy. No, he's as Jewish as you are, completely. Because he's as Jewish as you are, instead of feeling superior to him and negative towards him, on the contrary, you have a tremendous opportunity and privilege to help him or her reveal what they are already innately and essentially. Tragically, who understood this very, very clearly? As David HaMelech says in Tehillim, "Me oivai techakmeini." We sometimes become wise from our enemies. We sometimes need wisdom. We need to glean wisdom from our enemies. It would be nice if we wouldn't have to, but sometimes you look at your enemy in order to have chachma. If you look at the great enemies of the Jewish people, you'll see that they did not distinguish between this type of Jew or that type of Jew. Hitler, Yamach Shemai, it made no difference. A person who was a tzaddik, a Talmid Chacham, a Gon, a Baki Shas and Poskim, not only frum, but a Shoyme Torah Mitzvahs Mahadrim and a Mahadrim, and a Jew who considered himself a socialist, left-winger, atheist. If there was Jewish blood flowing through his veins, the venom was identical. Why was the venom identical? Because there was a kedusha, a holiness that he felt in every Jew, and he was allergic to it. And therefore the same hate, the same passion directed towards the most religious Jew was directed towards the most secular Jew, almost without distinction. Incredible. The Jew could be screaming, it's not me, I don't believe in this, I'm not part of this. But somehow the non-Jew felt the same holiness in this Jew like in this Jew. There was something at the core that could not be eradicated. The truth is, it goes back to Haman. Haman got upset at Mordechai because he wasn't bowing down to him. So kill Mordechai. Why do you have to kill every Jew? There were a lot of assimilated Jews in Shushan. Why do you have to kill every Jew? So what does the Megillah say? Ki higidu loi es am Mordechai. Haman understood that every Jew is a shtickle Mordechai. Every Jew is part of Mordechai. Mordechai is unique, he's holy, he's exceptional, kill him. No, he knew that there's something of Mordechai in every single Jew. So I'm explaining, without all of these examples, to this Jew in South Africa, that chosen people is not about discrimination, nothing to do with discrimination. It has to do with the fact that Jews are married to God. And when you're married to somebody, there's a special relationship, there's a special connection. You could be friends with other people. You're accountable to other people. You should respect all people. You're connected to all people on some level. But there's a unique, intimate connection that a husband and a wife share with each other, hopefully positive, sometimes unfortunately negative, but there is a unique relationship, a unique oneness, a unique connection. I was once traveling on an airplane to where was it, Puerto Rico. So it's I think a 4 or 5 hour flight. So when we land, I take out my phone and I call. I was sitting near a priest. The whole flight I was sitting near a priest. Priests are of course celibate. They're not allowed to get married. They made a mistake. It said celebrate. They thought it was celibate. Whatever, that's a separate issue. So we were schmoozing. It was a very, very, very interesting schmooze. He was a very educated man, and we had a very interesting conversation. So he asked me, "Why'd you take out your phone right away? Who are you calling?" I said, "I'm calling my wife. When I land, I call my wife." So he says, "You see, that's the advantage of not being married." I said, "What?" He says, "I don't have to call anybody. I'm a free man. I'm completely free. I don't have to call anybody. I'm alone." He says, "I'm going to be here now for 3 months, not accountable to anybody or anything. I don't have to make a call." But when you're married, he says, that's what the duties you have to do. It was a very interesting observation he made. Why? Because it made me think, indeed, it's true. When somebody is a bachelor, they don't have to call. They could go away for 3 months, not even tell anybody. Besides their mother, probably nobody will worry. As long as they tell their mother, Jewish mother especially, that he's alive, you're fine. If a person is married and you go away for 3 months, even for 3 hours, even for number of mine for 3 days without a call, it's probably not the wisest thing. Anybody of you who ever tried it knows what I'm talking about. On one level, you could say you're subjugated. On another level, the meaning is your life matters to somebody else. If I'm connected to somebody else, they're worried about me and I don't call, there are consequences because I'm not living on my own. I'm not isolated. What does it mean to be married? To be married means there's somebody who cares about you 24 hours a day, both ways. What does it mean to be married to God? Comes Shachris, God says, I'm waiting for a text message. Wo bist du? I'm waiting for a call. Mincha, I want another call. When you go on a business trip, how many times a day do you call your wife? At least 3. Usually you should call 9. She'll call you 9. You call 9. Together it's 18. But at least minimum 3 times. Shachris, Mincha, Ma'ariv. So when you understand that it's a relationship, it means that there is an essential connection, an essential powerful connection. Come now to the Mishnah in Maseches Gittin, the grounds for divorce. I'm going to say something. It's going to be a little strange and new to many people sitting here, but that's fine. We don't understand anything about the romance of the Tanoim and the Amoraim. We think that frum people are supposed to have miserable marriages. That's what many people think. The more religious, the more miserable the marriage. The more religious, the more God takes over the marriage, and the less it's a husband and a wife communicating together. I have heard from hundreds and hundreds of people, literally, I wish it was an exaggeration, but it's not, that their whole marriage, they don't even look forward to make it a good marriage. They get into the structure of religion, Shachus, Mincha, Ma'ariv, Shabbos, Yom Tov. The main thing is you produce a lot of kids, and that's it. Who even thinks about a relationship? This is a tragic mistake. It has nothing to do with Judaism. It has to do with our own failure to understand Judaism and understand relationships. It especially has to do with many mentors, leaders, Kala teachers, Chassan teachers, rabbis, and parents, who instead of educating their daughters and sons how to enjoy their marriage, instead, they really teach them things that are so absurd. I'm not going to talk about them right here. things that I hear are so absurd, are so based in Christianity, not in Judaism. And it's very, very sad. A lot of women, a lot of kalas and chasanim are taught that they're not supposed to enjoy their marriage. On the contrary, it's just a duty. The woman has to fulfill her duty. The man has to fulfill his duty. The husband is frustrated. The wife is frustrated. Everybody's frustrated. It takes them 15, 20 years to open up to somebody normal who tells them, Chevra, make a life for yourselves. God wants you to have a happy life. God wants you to enjoy each other spiritually, physically, emotionally, psychologically, socially. This is a big, big disaster in many, many circles. And of course, nobody talks about it because you're not allowed to talk about it because Judaism, we don't talk about these things. We don't talk about life. We only talk about chumras. The pasuk says in Parshas Vayetze, Vayishat, probably you skipped this pasuk. Vayishak Yaakov l'Rachel vayefk. Yaakov kissed Rachel, and he started to cry. So there was once a Yid, Chashav Yid, who gave a shir. He said, why did he cry? He said, Pashat, he kissed her. He said, Oi, I kissed a girl. So he started to cry to do tshuva. So somebody said over this story to the Ger Rebbe, to the Beis Yisrael. Somebody said over this word. So he said, I'll tell you why Yaakov cried. Yaakov cried because he knew that one day this rabbi is going to give this interpretation. That's why he started to cry. In other words, he started to cry about the fact that Jews think that love is treif, that relationships are a horrible thing, that whenever you talk about love between a husband and a wife, it's the worst thing in the world. You don't talk about it. That's why Yaakov was crying. Yaakov was crying about a Judaism that doesn't believe that people are people. So what happens is this. We make believe that men are angels. They're not. Most people are not addressing who they are. They're not giving them guidance or perspective. Because they're not giving them guidance or perspective, their whole intimate life is secretive. A few weeks ago, I gave a shir Shabbos morning up here in one of the shuls, and I spoke about the perspective of Judaism on relationships. A man comes over to me afterwards, I kid you not, and he says it was very nice, but it was really a big mistake what you did. I say, why was it a mistake? He says, my 18-year-old daughter was here, and she's not in shidduchim yet, and how could you speak about this in front of her? I said, did you hear what I said? He said, yeah. I said, did you like what I said? He said, I loved what you said. I said, you heard the Lashon Nakiya, the clean language in which I spoke about it? He said, yeah. I said, I always speak about it in clean language and very refined concept, very refined concept. What's the problem? He says, these things should not be discussed ever until the night before, the day before in this. Okay. I said, I beg to differ, but thank you for sharing. And he said, I don't think I could come back here and I can't bring her back. I said, okay, I'm sorry to hear that. So I kid you not, 6 minutes later, 2 girls come over to me. I'm on the porch. I say, can we speak to you? Yeah, we go to the side. And they both tell me that they're addicted to inappropriate sites, completely inappropriate sites. And they're telling me the films that they watch and the movies they watch and things that they're addicted to. One is 17, one is 18. And one of them says, the shir that you gave today in the morning was unbelievable. I never knew that Judaism has anything to say intelligent about this. My whole education I got from YouTube, certain sites on YouTube. Could you give this shir every Shabbos morning, discuss this? I said, that's so interesting. And what's your name? And she introduces herself, and it happened to be the daughter. It happened to be the daughter. And then I realized something very, very intense. And that is, many of us parents are completely in la-la land. We often don't know anything that's happening with our children. You have a good home. You don't even have internet in your house. But there's a class of 20, 30 kids. Almost every child, not every, gets exposed to information through one of the children in the class or in camp when they're 13, when they're 14. But they don't tell their parents. So we live in la-la land about our children. Sometimes their entire education about love they're getting from completely alien and often destructive forces. And when they get married, their entire paradigm has been shaped by YouTube, and the parents are completely clueless because they're Hasidisha or good yeshivisha parents. And that's why we live in a generation. You may think this is strange, but I'm giving you advice from soul to soul, friend to friend. And that is, parents today need to give an education to their children about intimate issues. age appropriate and sensitive according to their age and who they are. Don't stick your head in the sand. The amount of problems and challenges it creates later when they don't have these conversations, girls with mothers and boys with fathers usually, is disastrous. It would have been very nice if we lived in a different world. We don't live in that different world. And I'm talking here even in the most Hasidic communities where there's no internet and there's filters galore. There's one kid in the class who knows everything and introduces it to other kids. I learned this the hard way, and I see this as a fact. And this is where people need to understand that if Yiddishkeit only talks about things that are not really relevant to people's lives, we have failed ourselves as Jews. We have disconnected from Judaism. Why is it that Kala teachers have to tell Kalas that marriage is not, intimacy is not supposed to be enjoyable? What are men supposed to do? I don't know how many men, I'm not justifying them, how many people felt the need to go elsewhere to find enjoyment because they can't find it in their marriage. In the name of Kedusha, in the name of Tara, this is what we're doing. By not helping women and men learn how to be married in a powerful, healthy way, how many people are going elsewhere? Nichshel in Yinyonim of Misa B'dei Shamayim, all in the name of Chassidus, of Kedusha, Tara. If this is not corruption, what is corruption? If this is not corruption, what is corruption? In the name of holiness and sanctity, many, many young men desperately trying to satisfy themselves find all types of grotesque alternatives because they can't work it out in their marriage. And we call this holy. This is something that really needs to be rectified, at least in my humble opinion. That's what the Ger Rebbe said, why Yaakov was crying. Vayishak Yaakov l'Rachel vayevk, my interpretation of what he said. He was crying because he realized there's going to be a whole generation of Jews, including in Ger, among his own Hasidim, and others, who will completely misunderstand that relationships are holy. Relationships are sacred. The Ramban writes that the bedroom is called Kodesh HaKadoshim. It's the Holy of Holies. In Tanakh and Malachim, the Holy of Holies is called Cheder HaMitos, the bedroom. In Judaism, the bedroom is holier than a shul. How do I know? If there's no mikveh, you have to sell a shul and take the money and build a mikveh. Because a shul, you make mishaberachs, you daven and you make kiddushim, and the gabbai gets attention, or the rabbi gets attention, or the president gets attention. But mikveh is where the Jewish tomorrow is created. The essence of the relationship of a husband and a wife is kodesh kadoshim. I don't mean the spiritual relationship. I mean the physical relationship and the spiritual relationship. They work together. Whenever you create a Judaism that divorces ruchnius from gashmius, heaven from earth, and people from angels, when you make believe men and women are angels, you create neurotic people. You create sick people. You create people that are unhealthy. They're not functioning healthy. And religion becomes a very strange exercise. And their real life is completely in secret. Completely in secret. And they come, they sit down, and they expose themselves, and they think they're telling you things that nobody ever shared in the history of humanity, because they're the only human beings, because they thought that in their whole community, everybody is malachim. They're the only humans. Well, welcome to the United States of America. They say, what's the difference between a neurotic and a psychotic and a psychiatrist? The neurotic builds castles in the air. The psychotic lives in them. The psychiatrist collects the rent from both of them. So whenever you have a Judaism that doesn't integrate life, you create an issue, or you create a neurotic. Vayishak Yaakov l'Rachel vayevk. The Gemara says that when the Yuma, Non Daled, when the Gentiles came into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, what did they see? Ro hakruvim u'urin zebazeh. Now people are thinking, we came Tisha B'Av for a Shia, it's supposed to be about Tisha B'Av. How indeed did Rabbi, why do I get involved with Vayishak Yaakov l'Rachel vayevk? What are we talking about? The answer is this is the essence of the day. The Gemara says that when they went into Kodesh HaKadoshim on Tisha B'Av, they saw the kruvim u'urin zebazeh. The kruvim were intertwined with each other. They were integrated. They were hugging each other. Frek de Ritva, in Yuma, Nun Dalet. The Ritva doesn't make sense. The Gemara says in Yuma that when Jews would come up for Aliyah L'Regel, they would open up the paraychas and they would show them the kruvim. If they were looking at each other, the boy and the girl were looking at each other, it meant that Hashem and the Jewish people are in a good relationship, and that's why they're gazing at each other. If they looked away from each other, it means the relationship was problematic, so they looked away from each other. As the Ritva, what does it mean that Chamisha, the Tisha B'Av, the Kruvim U'Urim, not only were they looking at each other, they were literally hugging each other. It's the opposite. That time was the most, apparently, the greatest estrangement. So the Bnei Yissaschar brings a Torah from the Maggid of Mezrich. The Maggid of Mezrich says in Gemara in Yevamis, Chayav Adam Lifka des Ishtoi, B'shah sheyoytzi l'derech. Before a guy goes on a business trip, the Gemara says he has to be together with his wife. Since he's traveling, he has to make sure the night before he's together with his wife. Says the Maggid, since it was now Churban Beis HaMikdash, Eicha Yoshva Vodod, Ha'i Rabbasiyam Hoysa Kalmona, Zog the Medrash, Ki Isha Shahalach Baila Lemedinas Hayam. She's not a widow, she's like a widow. Why is she like a widow? Because her husband went on a long business trip. He crossed the Atlantic Ocean, Lemedinas Hayam. God went to America for 1700 years. He wasn't coming back, so we came to America to find him. Ki Isha Shahalach Baila Lemedinas Hayam. So therefore the Maggid says, right before that, Chayav Adam Lifka des Ishtoi. The husband has to be together with the wife. Why? Because he's leaving. So that's why on Tisha B'Av, before, so to speak, the Shechina left, it was a moment of Kruvim U'Urin Zebazev intimacy. It goes one step deeper. And that is, it says in Yerushalmi, that Mashiach is born on Tisha B'Av. That's why the Arizal brings, we say Nachem in the Mincha. What's Pshat Mashiach was born on Tisha B'Av? The seed of Mashiach is conceived from the intimacy between Hashem and the Jewish people during the Churban. Kruvim U'Urim Zebazeh, that conceives the seed of the Geula in the womb of the Jewish people that then develops throughout Galus until the Geula. Kruvim U'Urim Zebazeh. Now, Atkan Maimer HaMuzgar, now we come back to the Mishnah in Gittin. It's very hard for us to appreciate the truth. The Tanoim and Amirayim had a level of a relationship that is deeper than most of us can even appreciate. For us, if we basically get along in our houses and we don't kill each other, never mind if we even enjoy each other once in a while, it's already like, wow, what are you on? But by the Tanoim and Amirayim, the relationships were very, very deep. In fact, there's a Befedish Gemara in Brachas. I'm not going to get into the whole Gemara, but the Gemara basically points out that Reb Kahana wanted to learn about this part of Judaism, and he hid under the bed of Rav. Rav was the Gadol Hador. And the Gemara says in Brachas that he saw how much Rav enjoyed his wife, and he came out from under the bed afterwards, and Rav is like, what are you doing under the bed? And he says, Torah hi v'lilmed ani tzarech. This is Torah, and I have to learn this. Imagine you would tell this story today to people. They would say, this is not Judaism. This is Nishchse, this Eitza Befedish Gemara. Why'd they put it into the Gemara? They wanted to put it into the Gemara to teach people that the greater and holier a person is, the better marriage he has. The holier you are, the better your relationship with your spouse. The less holy you are, the worse the relationship. Why? More holiness, more connection. More greatness, more intimacy. The holier, the more spiritual somebody is, the closer they can be with their spouse. It's not the other way around. That's what the Gemara clearly says about Rav. According to this, come back now to the Mishnah in Gittin, and you'll see the meaning of the Mishnah. The meaning is as follows. You have Beis Shammai, you have Beis Hillel, you have Rabbi Akiva. Here you have to understand one thing. When we learn Mishnayos, we think it's just laws. Halacha, do this, don't do this, do this, don't do this. It's much more than that. It's not just what you should do and what you should not do. It's also a description of what is happening inside. The halacha outside is a reflection of the halacha inside. Let me explain what I mean. When you say, what are the grounds for divorce? What are the grounds that a husband and a wife should get divorced, chas v'shalom? What are the grounds? What is the meaning of this? The meaning of this is when he gives her a get, right? No, that's the last stage. You see, there are two phases in divorce. Phase one is external, legal. A man gives a get to his wife, They're legally divorced. They're not married anymore. He moves on. She moves on. That's the last stage. It doesn't begin with the get. Where does it begin? It begins inside. Sometimes you can have a couple that lives together for 40 years in the same house, but they're divorced. They're not legally divorced, but they're emotionally divorced. When the Mishnah says, what are the grounds for divorce? The Mishnah is not asking only when you give a get. The Mishnah is asking something much deeper. What has to happen or not happen in the relationship for a couple to know that inside they're not married? They may choose to remain married for the rest of their life for whatever reason. A lot of couples do that. They may choose to technically remain married, but how do they know inside if they're married? The divorce physically, the get, is only the last phase because internally there's a breakdown in the connection. How do you know that the connection has broken down to a point where you're not really married anymore? And then you give a divorce because you're not married. But again, this is not about the physical divorce. You could be married technically in the same house, but internally you're divorced. And therefore, halachically says, if you're internally divorced, get externally divorced. That's the question of the Mishnah. That's a much deeper question. How do you know you're divorced inside? How do you know you're not really married? You're living with somebody, you call them your wife, your husband, but you're not married. Now there are three opinions. And let me tell you, before we go through these opinions, these are very high levels of love. Modern man, modern woman usually can't even conceive this type of romance. Beis Shammai says, you know how you know that internally you're not married? Matzah ba'ervas davar. A couple has loyalty to each other. The moment that loyalty is broken, the moment the wife, the husband, betrays the loyalty, the moment there's no red lines that they don't cross, the moment they cross a certain boundary of loyalty, Beis Shammai says, internally you have to know there's something missing there. You may be friends, you may be business partners, you may respect her, she may respect you. All's good and fine. You're not married. If you were married, there's a certain level of betrayal that you don't reach. And if you're crossing that red line, it means you have to ask yourself, are you really married? Or maybe you're just legally married, but you're not married. Beis Shammai. Not bad for today's world. Comes Beis Hillel and says, was verstehst du in love? Let me tell you Beis Hillel's opinion. And I'm going to tell you right away, halavai, not that we would have this, halavai we would even be able to understand this. Beis Hillel says, afilu hikdicha tafshiloi, even if she burns your food. What does this mean? This means if you go home and your wife made you dinner, nishtum Tisha B'Av geret, but soon, and you eat it, and you say, Rebbitzin, this is really burnt. This is really horrible. This is disgusting. This is not food. This is not food. We should have gone to a restaurant. Afilu hikdichat avshila. If you could feel that your wife's food is burnt and there's a cook who is better than your wife, if you could feel that your wife's food is inferior to somebody else's food, Beis Hillel says, internally you're not married. If you were really, really married, the fact that it's your wife's food makes it the most delicious food that was ever concocted in the history of civilization since the tree of knowledge. Why? Because it's your wife's food. Now you're looking at me, I'm like, what? That's my point. We don't even understand what this means. But that's what Beis Hillel is saying. If you could taste somebody's food and say, ooh, I wish my wife would cook like this, that means you're not married. If you would be married, the fact that your wife made you the food, my wife made me this verhackte food, it's Tam Gan Eden Mamish beyond. It's not what she made, it's who made it. It can't be burnt. There's so much romance, there's so much love in every one of those burnt pieces of food. Where are you going to get that? You're going to get that in a restaurant? You're going to get that on Amazon? Where are you going to get that? At a Kiddush Shabbos afternoon, Shabbos morning, you're going to get that. Where are you going to get that? Now you're looking at me like, Rabbi, food is food. That's the point. By you, food is food. By Beis Hillel, food was love. Food was energy. Food was part of a relationship. Here again, are we eating in order to live, or do we live in order to eat? We all know that some of us, especially in the frum world, have a challenge. We live in order to eat. The highlights of Judaism today have become food. Our religion revolves around food. Shavuos, cheesecake. Pesach, whatever the food of Pesach are. I mean, hopefully good macaroons or pizza, depends which hotel you go to. Sukkot, you eat outside, etc. Chanukah is this. But our Shabbos meals, it's food, 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 food. The main thing is food. Really, we eat in order to live. We don't live in order to eat. But eating often becomes the highlight. It's the destination. It's like the reward. Arya Moisa Mashiach is the meal. It's like davening is over, we're going to the meal. Like food became the objective of life. Of course, food is only, you have to learn from the animals. I never heard from a sheep, I would love to eat this ice cream, but I have a wedding next week and I have to look good for the pictures. Or a horse who wants to eat Fruity Pebbles or a cheese Danish and says, but you know what, I'm on a diet, you never know, I need a shidduch, whatever. Somehow sheep and horse eat for one purpose, they eat to live. How it happened that we started to eat simply to numb our pain is another interesting study. But we don't eat to live, we eat to numb our anxiety and pain. At least some of us, not all of us. And so, Beis Hillel says, if your wife burnt your food, you're not married. You're in a business relationship, that's not marriage. They say the Maisa, Yankel Nebuch was a widower, he lost his wife. So he moved in with his son and his daughter-in-law. And she would make him dinner every night. She was a very good daughter-in-law. And he would always eat the soup. And he was Nebuch, he loved his wife. They were married for 62 years, imagine. And they had a great marriage. And he would always finish eating the soup and she would say, Nu shver, how was the soup? And he would say, listen, you're not bad, aber se kippt nicht. Se kippt nicht zu dein Schwieger. It's not like your mother-in-law used to make the soup. You're not bad, and I appreciate it. But anyway, once she was in Costco, she was shopping Thursday for Shabbos, and suddenly she remembers, she left the soup on the fire, and she forgot to turn off the fire. She calls the house, is anybody home, to turn off the fire. Nobody is home. The only one who's home was the shver, but for him to go and turn off the fire, he would have made a fire. So she decided not to ask him. And she left go in Costco. You know what Costco is? It's not so posh at Thursday afternoon, a woman alone in Costco. It's really a man's job. She drops all the packages. She runs into the car. She goes home. She runs in, and the soup is in ganzen verbrennt. It's like one shtick ashes. After the churban, she shuts the fire, and he comes down for supper. It's 5 o'clock, like a clock. And she doesn't know what to do. I mean, it's such garbage, whatever. But she says, it's better than nothing. So she gives him mamas this verhackte, verstunkene, verbrennte soup. And she starts apologizing. He starts eating. She says, I want to tell you what happened. I went to Costco. He says, by the way, finally today, the soup was like the shviger. Finally, the soup was like the shviger. One day it was like the shviger. That's what Beis Hillel is saying. Comes Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva says, what do you guys understand about relationships? Because it was Rabbi Akiva, he could say this. If it was anybody but Rabbi Akiva, he couldn't say this. Because it was Rabbi Akiva says, let me tell you something. If you're walking in the street, or you're on the subway, or you're on a bus, or you're on a plane, or you're in your office, wherever you are, and you see somebody, and she could have more beauty than your wife, Rabbi Akiva says, you are internally divorced. If you're capable of seeing beauty somewhere more than in your own spouse, it means your connection is compromised. Now again, let's face it. If we would simply live by Beis Shammai's ideal of what marriage is, we would do pretty well. What does it mean to be married? To be loyal to each other. It's not a bad definition. Beis Hillel is like Gewalt. Rabbi Akiva is beyond. Rabbi Akiva is saying if you're really married to somebody, if you're really connected to somebody, you're so crazy about them, there's nothing more beautiful in the world. It's like a mother with a child. If you think your child is not cute, there's something wrong with you. Somebody else may think your child is not cute. We know that. We know that. A mother calls me up the other day. Her daughter was thrown out of school, whatever. So she asks me advice. So I said, what are you thinking? She says, I'll tell you, I want to be objective. And objectively, the principle is right. So therefore, I don't want to mix in. Is that right? I said, Jacobson, let me tell you something. Your daughter's going to grow up. She's going to be in the world. She's going to meet hundreds or thousands of people who will treat her objectively. She only has one person in the world who's supposed to treat her subjectively. You're also going to become objective about her? Don't you dare. You never become objective about your daughter. You remain as subjective as you can because it's your daughter. You fight for your children. You don't become an objective, detached, aloof bystander. You fight for your kids. Fight for them. Fight through thick and thin. And don't let bureaucracies snuff the soul out of your kids. Never. You fight for your kids. If you have to create a new school, you create a new school. If you have to homeschool, you homeschool. If you have to take them to another school, you take them to another school. You fight for your kids. Don't be objective with your kids. So a mother will say, my child is not that cute. I once heard a mother tell somebody on the phone, he wanted to hire a daughter. She says, I just have to tell you that she's a little lazy. I'm like, wow, you're so interesting. She says, I have to be objective. Now, you may want to talk to your daughter about getting her act together, but you got to fight for your child. So Rabbi Akiva says, if there's somebody more beautiful, it means you're internally not married. So here's the story that really illustrates this. It's one of the very beautiful stories. The holy Rishon, Rabbi Yisrael of Rishon, was a very holy Jew. And by the way, in Rishon, they didn't know how to do Tisha B'Av. They didn't know how to do Tisha B'Av. They would have a swing, Tisha B'Av at night by Eicha. They would come into the shul, and there were chassidim, two guys that had like a chair, and was like a swing. You would sit down, and they would lift you up to the rafters. The holy Rishon that came in, they didn't see who he was. They put him down in the chair, they lift him up to the top, and they see it's the Rabbi Yisrael of Rishon. They wanted to kill themselves from shame. He lifts up his eyes to heaven, he says, Yibboyne Shalom, du zest as deine Kinder, weißen nicht, wie zu praven Tisha B'Av, nimm es weg von sich. Your children don't know how to respect Tisha B'Av, take it away from them. They don't deserve it, take it away from them. Once Isru Chag Yom Tov, the Rishon comes out from his room, his office, around 12 o'clock or 11:30 a.m. into the shul, and he sees a young man putting on his talis and tefillin, he's starting to daven. Asks the Rishon, why are you davening so late? So he says, why am I davening so late? I'm the only one davening so late. This whole room is filled with people who are davening now. So the Rishon says, I don't understand. Why don't you wake up early and daven early? Why are you davening now, 11:30 in the morning? So he says, Rebbe, here's a man. All these older chassidim from Rishon who were starting to daven then. What do you want from me? Why are you picking on me? So the Rishon says, I'll tell you a story. There was once a Jew. He was a wood chopper. Let's call him Yankel. He used to chop wood a whole day. Exhausted, he would come home and he would have one meal. 9 o'clock, his wife would give him a piece of potato, a hard piece of bread, a cup of water. That was his daily meal. By Iyayim, the wood chopper comes home. It's 9 o'clock. He's starving. There's no meal. His wife is not home. No, he thinks to himself, my wife, she probably wants to make me feel good. So tonight she decided to prepare a Suda Shloima B'Shaita. Going to make a big meal, and that's why the supper is delayed. Then he thinks to himself, but where did she get the money to buy real food, meat, chicken, vegetables, fish? She probably pawned off her jewelry. She probably put her jewelry in a mashkin. She gave it away as a mashkin, as collateral, to get money to buy all these foods. And he starts thinking about the tremendous chavivus, the tremendous respect and sensitivity his wife has towards him, knowing his hard work, how she wants to reward him with a good dinner. It's now 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, his kishkas are turning over from hunger, but he's saying, any moment, this dinner, this lavish dinner with Levyasan and Sher Habar are going to come out and nurture and nourish my hungry soul. It's 11:30 p.m. The poor guy is starving. He's been fasting all day, chopping wood. His wife runs into the house and says, "Oh, yeah, Uncle, I'm sorry, I forgot. I had to leave. You didn't even eat yet." And she brings him a piece of potato, a glass of water, and a hard piece of bread. He says to her, "For this meal, I didn't have to wait till 11:30 p.m. This meal I could have had 9 o'clock, I could have had 8 o'clock. For this, I didn't have to wait." So the Ruzhiner, the Bisrael of Ruzhin, turns to this Jew and he says, Meila Yid, who gets up early, he prepares for davening, goes to the mikveh, he learns. It says in Shulchan Aruch before davening, Tzarech Lizboinen, Begadlus Hakel, V'Shiflus Ha'adam. He learns Torah, he learns Pnimiyus HaTorah, he learns Chassidus, he gets Nesoyer and Ave and Yira, and then he davens late. No. Hashem says, for this meal it was worth waiting. He says, but dein davening, you're davening this, you could have done 6 o'clock in the morning also. This you could have done of a second davening also. For your type of davening, you're fahak the potato with your piece of bread, with your cup of water. For this, God doesn't have to wait a half a day. You wake up in the morning, you daven up, and you're done. What are you comparing yourself to their davening? It's completely different davening. Your davening, you have no justification to do it late. Your davening, you do early in the morning. If you're preparing for hours for davening, Mela. Okay. They leave Rishon and they go home. On the way home, they stop what's called a Kretschmann Inn, what we call today Motel 6. And the Hasidim coming home from Rishon are sitting around the table. And they're eating, they're saying L'chaim, they're fabraying, they're shmuzing. It was a cold night after Tishrei. And these inns used to have these big ovens, the Tanur, the Chirayim. There was the logs and fire on the bottom, and on top people would sit, sleep, lay. There was an old man, he looked like 100 years old, a Ben Meah, was laying on top of the oven and then resting. He sees these Hasidim coming from the Heilig Yerushalayim sitting around, shmuzing, eating, drinking, and fabringing together, speaking Divrei Torah, Divrei Chassidus. He looks at them and he says, "From Vikimtir, where are you coming from?" Say, "We're coming from the holy Rabbi Yisrael of Ruzhin." He says, "Nu zaktzap savart." Tell me something from what he said. So they decided, what do they have a better word than what he said this morning? And they said over to this old man what he said this morning to this young chassid who davened late. The whole mashal with the dinner for the woman and the husband, the wife and the husband. So this man looks at them and he says, your Rebbe is wrong. He's making a very, very big mistake. No, these were real chassidim. They couldn't tolerate hearing that. They wanted to jump him, a chutzpah. He says the tradition is wrong. Where does he get this audacity? They start hollering. He says, relax, I'll explain to you why he's wrong. Listen to me. He says, I say that if that husband would have really loved his wife, then even if it's 11:30 p.m. and all she gives him is a piece of potato and a piece of bread and a cup of water, he would have enjoyed it so much because it was coming from his wife. It would have been as pleasurable as the Levyasan and the Sher Habar, and he would have not complained. And I say that if God really loves a Jew, then even a davening that is fast, even if it's imperfect and it's flawed and it's not impeccable and it has a lot of mistakes and it's a few hours late, I say that he would still love it and cherish it and savor every moment of it and every component of it because it's coming from somebody that he loves so much. And therefore I say your Rebbe is wrong. No, Chassidim haben achush hareach. You have to have a sense of smell. So what do? They go back. They knew they had to go back. They went back to the Bisrael of Ruzhin. They went into him and they told him what happened. And the Heilig Yerushalayim said that the soul of this Jew came down to the world to say this vart. His neshama came down to this world just to communicate this insight. And they understood what he meant. He was around 100 years old. And this was like his grand finale, his ultimate final statement that he needed to say to fulfill his mission in this world. But this insight that he gave is essentially the explanation of this Mishnah. If you're really married, the food is not burnt. And if God is really married to them, their food is not burnt. It's not hikdichat avshiloi. That's the view of Beis Hillel. Now you can understand why in this Mishnah, the halach is like Beis Shammai. Beis Shammai's standard we can appreciate. Beis Hillel's standard, Rabbi Akiva's standard, is something absolutely unique. The same Rabbi Akiva who says in Maseches Yadayim that Kol Kisvei HaKodesh, Kodesh, V'Shir HaShirim, Kodesh Kadashim. All of the Tanakh is holy, but Shir HaShirim is the holy of holies. Lo haya ha'olam kedai ki yom shenitem bo Shir HaShirim liYisrael. The world was not worthy like the day that Shir HaShirim was given to the Jewish people. What is Shir HaShirim? Shir HaShirim essentially is a love poem about the chassan and the kala, the groom and the bride, which is a metaphor, a mashal for the relationship between Hashem and the Jewish people. Rabbi Akiva, the one who claims that Shir HaShirim is Kodesh Kadashim, that the whole world is Kedai, it was never Kedai like the day Shir HaShirim was given to the Jewish people. He describes what marriage is. Afilu motza acheres noah himeno means that you are completely disconnected. If there's motza acheres noah himeno, that means you're not really in. If you're really in, there's nothing more beautiful, nobody more precious, nobody more wholesome, nobody more gorgeous. Because nafshay kshura benafsha. There's no concept of beauty that is deeper. Now I tell you, is this an ideal to speak about? Yes, it's an ideal to speak about. Is it an ideal that everybody is capable of constantly? I don't know. But it's an ideal that one has to entertain, one has to internalize. Which now brings us to the Boine Yerushalayim Hashem. You remember? Nidche Yisrael Yechanes. And here we come to an insight of the Tzemach Tzedek. Tzemach Tzedek says as follows. There's a Mishnah in Masechta Baba Metzia, Daf Kuf Yud Zayin Amud Aleph. The Mishnah says, Habayis v'haliyah. You have a house, you have two condominiums. I'm living on the bottom floor, you're living on the top. There's a tsunami, a hurricane, and both condominiums get destroyed. What's the halacha? So the Mishnah says, the one on the bottom has to rebuild the bottom, and the one on the top could then rebuild the top. What happens? The bottom one says, you know what, I had enough with this neighborhood. I'm moving to Palm Beach. I'm moving to Yerushalayim. I'm moving to Switzerland. I had enough. I'm out. I'm not building my bottom floor. The guy on the top says, what am I supposed to do? I need your roof as a foundation. I need your pillars. I need your walls. What am I supposed to do? He says, it's not my problem. He says, it is your problem. I own the second floor, and I cannot have it. I cannot build it if the first one is not built. He says, I'm not interested. I'm not mechuyev to rebuild your house. I'm out. So what does the Mishnah say? Very interesting halacha. The one on the top could rebuild the floor, the lower condominium, and move into it. He rebuilds the condominium on the bottom, and he moves into it. The guy on the bottom comes back from Palm Beach, comes to visit for Pesach. He says, whoa, I like it. I want my house back. I want my house back. I like what you did. Nice kitchen, nice dining room, nice renovations. He says, no problem. You can have your house back. The Mishnah says you have to pay him the expenses. He renovated your house. As long as he didn't do extraordinary renovations, but he did the common renovations to rebuild it, you have to pay him for the renovations. And then you could move into your house. And then he takes the money, and with this money, he either rebuilds the top floor, the higher condominium, or it's now his turn to go to Palm Beach. But the bottom line is, once you pay him his expenses, the owner of the lower condominium could then move back into his house. That's the Mishnah Abayis V'Aliyah, the end of Bab Metzia, the end of the 10th chapter of Bab Metzia, Kuf Yud Zayin. Every Mishnah in the whole Shas could be understood on two levels: Pshat and Soid. Every Mishnah, every Gemara, no difference if it's Uktzin or Erevin, Zvachim or Chulin, Psachim or Yuma, Baba Basra, Baba Kama. Every Sugya, every Mishnah, every Gemara, every Halach in Tur, Shulchan Aruch, Rambam, Rosh, Rif, could be understood on Pshat level, but also there's always a spiritual dimension to every Halach. There's no Halacha that doesn't have a spiritual dimension. What is the deeper dimension of this Halach? Zog the Tzemach Tzedek. Habayis v'haliyah. What's the bias in the aliyah? There's a cosmic bias and a cosmic aliyah. What is that? The Gemara says in Maseches Tainis, there's Yerushalayim Shel Mata and Yerushalayim Shel Maila, and they parallel each other. There's the physical Jerusalem, and there's the spiritual, metaphysical Jerusalem. Rashi says on the pasuk, Yaakov wakes up and he says, Ein Zekiyim Beis Elikim, V'zeh Shar Hashamayim. This is the gate to heaven. Zok Rashi, Beis HaMikdash Shel Lamata, Mechuvan, Keneged Beis HaMikdash Shel Lamayla. The Beis HaMikdash down here was parallel to the Beis HaMikdash up there. The two are parallel. So you have the bias is the home on the bottom. The aliyah is the spiritual attic, the second floor of Yerushalayim, the Beis HaMikdash. For many years, the Baal HaBayis and the Baal HaAliyah, the Jewish people, and the Shechina lived together. The Jews and the Bayis, the Shechina and the Aliyah, and they got along. There's always issues between neighbors, right? That's the fact. What do they say? Good fences, good neighbors make. In this case, not. But the Bayis and the Aliyah, they live together. Then comes the Churban Beis HaMikdash. Habayis va'aliyah shenoflu. The Romans came in, first the Babylonians, then the Romans, and they destroyed the Bayis. But they didn't only destroy the Bayis. They destroyed also the Aliyah. Because the Gemara says in Tainis, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Nishba HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hashem made an oath. I will not enter into Yerushalayim Shel Maila as long as the Jews don't enter into Yerushalayim Shel Mata. Hashem made an oath. As long as the Jews are not in the Bayis, he will not be in the Aliyah. So once the Bayis was destroyed, the Aliyah was also destroyed. It's not that the Beis HaMikdash is gone, but the Shechina remains in full tact. The Gemara says at the end of Megillah, B'chol makim shegalu Yisrael, Shechina iman, Amar Rashbi, galu la'edem, galu la'bavel, galu la'elam, galu la'yavan, Shechina iman. The Aliyah was also shattered. So the Bayis is shattered, the Aliyah is shattered. What's now? The Baal HaAliyah comes to the Baal HaBayis and says, rebuild. Rebuild your house so I could move into my condominium on the top. Rebuild the lower so I could go into the higher. What does this mean? Hashem tells, the Baal HaAliyah tells the Jewish people, the Baal HaBayis, rebuild Yerushalayim. Tosfos says in Maseches Tainis Daf Yud, Yerushalayim is two words. Yira, Shalom. Complete Yira. Wholesome awe. Yira Shalom, Yerushalayim. Rebuild Yerushalayim, Yira Shalom. Rebuild your Beis HaMikdash v'asili Mikdash v'shachanti b'soicham. The Rambam says in Hilchos Tshuva Perek Zayin, Hifticha Torah, shesoif Yisrael lasis tshuva, umiyad hei negalim. Do tshuva, rebuild Yerushalayim, rebuild the Beis HaMikdash spiritually, v'shachanti b'soicham Yira Shalom, and then I'll be able to move into the Aliyah. You'll be back in your home. I'll be back in my higher condominium. You'll be back in your lower condominium. And we'll go back to the Baal HaBayis and the Baal HaAliyah together. That's the system of halacha, the Mishnah Baba Metzia. What happens now? Comes the Baal HaBayis and he tells the Baal HaAliyah, Ani lo munyan. I'm not interested. I'm going to go find another house. That's the story of it. I'm not interested. I'm not interested. I'll find different sources. I'll find different homes. I'll find different places of refuge. I'll find alternatives. I'm not interested in going this route. If you're familiar with Jewish history, you understand how vivid this description is. What happens now? There's no bias. The Baal HaAliyah wants to move in, but there's no bias. It's bitter. It's bitter. The Baal HaBayis says, I'm not interested in rebuilding. What happens? The Baal HaAliyah comes and rebuilds the house. The owner of the upper condominium comes and rebuilds the lower condominium. He says, I'm going to rebuild it. You know what happens now? The Baal HaBayis comes back and says, whoa, good job. I'm coming back. No, I need to get paid. I need my expenses to get paid. Pay up all the expenses, everything I put into it. Then you'll go back. That's where we're holding now in the Mishnah. Now come to the Pasuk. Says the Medrash, Afal pi sheboinei Yerushalayim Hashem, mikol makoim, nidche Yisrael yechanes. Even though Hashem builds Yerushalayim, so you would think, since Hashem is boinei Yerushalayim, since the Baal HaAliyah is building the bias, he tells the Baal HaBayis, you want to come back? Great, but you have to pay expenses. Afal pikein nidche Yisrael yechanes. He's still going to bring back all the Jews without any conditions, without any prerequisites. Don't think that just like in the Mishnah, the Baal HaBayis refuses. The Baal HaBayis has to pay up all the haitzahs. Don't think the same thing is going to happen here. That's the pshat in the Medrash. Even though he's building it, nidche Yisrael yechanes. Why? The answer is because in the Mishnah you're talking about two neighbors. Neighbors are neighbors. It's all nice, but they're still neighbors. They're strangers essentially. Here you're not talking about two neighbors. Here you're talking about a husband and a wife, a father and a child, a mother and a child. Here you're talking about two that are essentially connected. So therefore, Hashem says, I built it, but come in. Just come in, I want you to be here. I'm not going to wait till you do all your expenses. That's why boinei is Lashon Hoiva, Yechanes is Lashon Asid. Boinei, he rebuilds. Yechanes, in the future, after the Baal HaBayis rebuilds, he gathers in the children. This is an interpretation given by the Tzemach Tzedek in this Medrash, based on the Mishnah Bava Metzia. I will give you a little, maybe not such a little, but an interesting postscript to this. And I'm not suggesting interpretation or commentary, because it's beyond me to suggest this type of commentary or interpretation. But I do find it quite historically fascinating and interesting, and maybe really other adjectives should be used here. That is, Yutas Kislev, Tovshin Chavav, 1966, the Lubavitcher Rebbe was having a Farbrengen for the Chag HaGeula of Yat Kislev, and it was always the case at the weekday Farbrengens, he would do a Hadrin, a Siyam on a Masechta. And Yutas Kislev, they have a minute to be Messiah Shas, he would always make a Siyam Shas, or on one of the Masechtas of Shas. That year, he made a Siyam on Baba Metzia. He made a Hadrin on Baba Metzia. And he did a whole long Hadrin, Machlaikas with the Rambam, Shtei Guinness, a whole Sugya, Reb Yehuda, Reb Meir. Now he finished the Hadrin. He said now he wants to say something else. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe sent over this whole vart from his grandfather, from the Tzemach Tzedek, who he was named after, this whole shtickle about Boinei Yerushalayim Hashem with the Baal HaBayis and the Baal HaAliyah. He got very emotional when he said it, extremely emotional, about how the Baal HaBayis doesn't want to build. The Baal HaAliyah says, he said the Baal HaAliyah said, Benktzechem, he yearns to be with his children. It's too hard for him to be separated. So he'll do anything to get it back. So he goes and builds himself, waiting for the Baal HaBayis to come back, and this whole thing. And he finished the Vart all in the name of the Tzemach Tzedek. Exactly, what are we now? This was 51 years ago, Tavshin Chavav. 1 year later, Mamish a year later, 18 months later, Tavshin Chav Zayin, was the 6-Day War. The 6-Day War was unexpected. But the 6-Day War, which happened exactly 50 years ago, in June 1967, was a watershed moment in modern Jewish history. If you're familiar with the 6-Day War, the 6-Day War was an incredible moment in Jewish history. I know some people sitting here in the room remember it. I wasn't born yet, so I don't remember it. But the fact is that the Jewish people then numbered close to 3 million in Israel. 7 countries pledged the destruction of the Jewish homeland, including, of course, its enemies right at its borders, Egypt in the south, and Syria in the north, and Jordan in the east. Plus, they got help from many countries, and of course, the Soviet Union, and they spoke about another Auschwitz. The Jews will be driven into the Mediterranean. There will be another Auschwitz. The Jewish world was in panic, and there was a reason for the panic. It was only 20 years after the end of the Holocaust. 1945 in April, Second World War ended, and this was 1967. Barely 2 decades, 22 years later, and 3 million Jews in Israel faced, Rahman al-Islam, what seemed like another Holocaust, including many survivors who barely survived the first Holocaust. Levi Eshkol was the prime minister at the time. He got onto the radio to give a speech to soothe the country, to soothe the people. I once heard a recording. In middle, he breaks down. You can understand the prime minister gets up, the commander-in-chief gets up to calm the people, and he got so confused and emotional in the middle of the speech, it brought everybody else into panic. It was a very, very powerful moment of fear, for good reason. They prepared grave sites, expecting 60,000 casualties, 70,000 casualties, body bags. They had to make new fields for Batei Kvaros, and so on and so forth. What happened was something extraordinary. And that is, it was on Monday, excuse me, the end of year, Tavshin Chav Zayin, June 5th, 67. In the morning, the Israeli Air Force took off and within 6 hours destroyed the entire Egyptian Air Force. That itself, how that happened without the Egyptians noticing what's going on, is also an incredible story. How the Egyptians allowed their entire Air Force to be completely decimated and destroyed within the first 6 hours of this preemptive strike of Israel. The war was over 6 days. And in those 6 days, Israel was tripled, 3 times the size. Golan Heights it got from Syria, Sinai Desert and Gaza from Egypt, East Jerusalem, including the Kaisel, Beis Lechem, Hebron, Yehuda, Shomron, from Jordan. What happened as a result of that was that in 6 days, the victory was so powerful that in secular media, the non-Jewish media, they would call it, they defined it as a victory of biblical proportions, like stories of the Tanakh. It was an incredible moment in Jewish history. What I want to bring out here is the story of Jerusalem, of Yerushalayim. Israel was allergic to the old city of Jerusalem. Levi Eshkol, who was the prime minister, Moshe Dayan, who was the defense minister, and Yitzchak Rabin, who was the chief of staff, the Ramatkal, they were allergic to Jerusalem. It was religious. You're dealing with the church. You're dealing with the Muslims. They wanted it should be under Jordan. Let the old Jerusalem be. Some of the generals, there was a man named Motke Gur and Uzi Narkis, who actually withdrew from Jerusalem in 1948 and lost it, wanted to go back and gain it. But they wouldn't let them. The higher political echelon said no. Israel didn't want Jordan to get involved in the war. Jordan was in control of East Jerusalem. They told Jordan, if you don't touch us, we don't touch you. But Jordan, swept away by the lies of Nasser in Egypt, that Egypt is having a victory, because Arabs are very good in propaganda. It doesn't have to be true. Egypt said that they're victorious, and Jordan believed it, and Jordan attacked. And Israel begged them to stop, but they wouldn't cease attacking. And still, Israel did not want to go into the old city of Jerusalem. They refused. Till the last moment, Dayan, Eshkol, Rabin, the political leaders of the land, did not want the Tzahal to enter into the old city of Jerusalem. What happened was, they say, Menachem Begin was dressed up as a chassid for a few years during the years of the Second World War when he was fighting the British, and they were after him. And he would listen every night to BBC headlines, 12 o'clock a.m. There's BBC headlines. And Begin heard that night also, BBC, the night before Chav Zayin Iyar, Thursday, that tomorrow there's going to be a ceasefire. The UN is going to impose a ceasefire. They say that he called Levi Eshkol in the middle of the night, the prime minister, and he told them that this is a historic moment that the Jews could take back their ancient homeland and the Kaisel and Arabayas, etc. And Eshkol said, it's the middle of the night. We need a cabinet meeting. So he said, so let's do it in the middle of the night. And they summoned the members of the cabinet of the Israeli government in the middle of the night. They still call it today the pajama meeting, because everybody basically came in their pajamas 2 or 3 in the morning. And they voted yes. And that morning, I think 10 o'clock a.m., Motke Gur famously declared, Har HaBayit Biyadenu. Now, in the war, 800 soldiers died. They expected 60,800. But more, I think, than a fourth were killed in the Battle of Jerusalem because they wanted to do it in a very delicate, this is where Jews become their worst enemies, and in order not to anger anybody, they will bend over backwards in order to appease the world, which anyway can't stand them, but that's a separate parsha. And Yerushalayim was returned to the Jewish people, the Kaisel was returned to the Jewish people, the Har HaBayis was returned to the Jewish people. They put up a flag then on the Har HaBayis. Within a few hours, Moshe Dayan demanded it to come off, which was again a symptom of the Israeli leadership not knowing what to do with victory. Jews know very well how to lose. We don't know how to win. After 2,000 years in exile, we do very well with loss. We're good at it. A Jew makes a fist. The next step is Ashamnu, Bagadnu, Gazalnu, Al Chet, Al Chet, Al Chet. That's how it is. When it comes to victory, Jews feel very ashamed, very apologetic. We don't know what to do. Israel had such a victory 50 years ago, and they're still apologizing. 50 years later, they're apologizing for having that land, as though it's not their land. That's a very painful reality when Jews are not proud with who they are and what they are. But the next year, Yerushalayim was given back to the Jewish people. And I always found it fascinating. The Baal HaAliyah, almost against the choices of the Jews in Israel, almost forced upon them, they got back Yerushalayim. The Baal HaBayis was invited back into Yerushalayim. So you might think you have to wait till we pay back all the expenses. So the Medrash says, Afal pi shebayni Yerushalayim Hashem. Nonetheless, nidche Yisrael yechanes, because you're dealing with a relationship of two, of Hashem and the Jewish people, that love each other in the most powerful love in the world. A husband and a wife on the deepest level, a parent and a child on the deepest level. And therefore he says, come into my city. Come, let's be together forever. Thank you. Bye. The next shir will be at 6.
That's good. Well, what's the cheshbon with Cheshbonoim? The mindset.
Thank you so much.
There, you had a lot of misgivings. They wanted to. They wanted that they should.
After.
You didn't come back to the slip.
That's true. That's true.
Thank you very much.
Very inspiring.
Thank you.
I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Yankee Carmel's son.
Shalom Aleichem.
Thank you very much.
Where's this my display?
Gedenken, er zit al, ze gebracht.
I just recently I finished reading the book on the presidents of Israel.
Avner.
Avner's book. His relation, Menachem Begin's particular relationship with the Lubavitcher was very close.
just want to tell you something. You know, every time I want to come to a speech from me on Tuesday, I hear, say, I can't believe blah, 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 blah. This speech, I understand what she means. I never remember, like, I could speak a speech for everyone, also. Honestly, I gain respect for you.